some reason there's an issue, just hang out in the group. Don't panic or anything because that doesn't serve a purpose, obviously. So tonight's episode is going to be on Deathbed Visitation. And so again, I'm going to wait for everybody to come on in. And why is my page not cooperating? I'm not even sure here. Let me get out of here. There we go. Okay. And screw it down. There we go. Should be in here now. Do a refresh. Goodness gracious. No. So just waiting for my feed to start within the group since I do monitor chat. Then I can get that set up. And once I know folks are in the feed, I can explain what's happening for tonight because I don't like talking to myself, basically. Well, delay. There I am. There I am, darling. Okay, good. Hi, guys. Okay, so since there's a few of you in there now, what we're doing tonight is that if there is some sort of an issue, some random issue that happens, because Katie's trying a kind of a new platform, we are now up on Soma Fusion TV, which plays around the clock 24/7. And I'm sure that the information for it will be within that big post that she makes above the show. So you should be able to find it in there. If for some reason we have some weird glitch tonight, then just hang out in a group and, refresh it every 30 seconds, whatever, and wait and see if we restart. Like, don't panic or anything because, it'll be okay. So anyways, hello, my lovelies and all my sisters. So tonight we're going to be, like I said, covering Deathbed Visitation is the topic for tonight. Hey, Tanya. So as I was explaining when I first started, before everybody got in and the feed got started, I do monitor my Facebook chat because that's where everybody comes to watch me primarily. A few stragglers over on YouTube, which is fine, but most people come over here. And if you say something in YouTube, it shows up in my chat here anyway. So my audience is a huge part of my show. So let me do the blessing for the group as normal. Hi, Kim. Come on, match. Stay lit. There we go. It's kind of funny because I keep getting my notification from Facebook saying, be ready to start your live video. Yeah, we kind of already did, Facebook. Catch up. You can do it. There you go. All right, so with this sage, I cast a circle of protection around anyone and everyone who comes in to watch the show live or who happens to be watching the replay as well. May they stay safe and protected from any ill will or harm of any kind and carry that with them out into their private lives as well. Anything else? Yeah, I think we'll go with that for tonight. And so I will. So mote it be. Boy, I got like one ember going on my sage stock bundle. Not even enough to hit little girl with it. Goodness, let's relight it just so we can kind of run it past her. So as you may have noticed, Katie just posted the link for our Soma Fusion Hybrid Web TV and live stream. So if something should happen to the feed, as I explained, just hang out in a group for a minute. We're just trying it on a new platform because we now are on a different platform, so to speak, to where it's same protocol, same, setup and so forth. It's just that now where she has us, we broadcast 24/7. So not just Willows, but all the Soma Fusion shows round the clock. So if anybody is bored, middle of the night, they can go watch it there, or any time of day for that matter. So I'm just going to run this over my stones, cleansing them of all energies except for their own, with the hopes they work with mine. And little girl's energy, with the hopes that she will work with mine. She's looking at me like, the fuck? Poor cat. She ought to be used to it by now, don't you think? I think. Set these things up here. The sage smolder out there. Yeah, just the usual feed. So just in case there's a weirdo tech issue thingy, but just stay in the group, we'll be fine. So, where's my notes over here? So tonight we're going to be talking about deathbed visitation and all that that entails. All right, so why don't we get started? Because most of you are here. Stragglers always wander in. We know that. There are no tech issues. Beautiful. All right, so what is a deathbed visitation? I mean, obviously, it's kind of common sense, but I always do a definition. So a deathbed visitation is when close to the time of death, apparitions of friends and loved ones come to escort the dying to the other side, are what people report of seeing. Now, it's not for everybody, doesn't happen with everybody. However, there are many it does. So deathbed visitations are more common than one might think, and are surprisingly reported as far as the similarities across all nationalities and religions and cultures. These unexplained, quote unquote, visions have been recorded throughout history. Now, I will say, that said, I did try to find like the earliest known mention of it in any ancient texts, what have you, and nothing came back on any searches I did between two different search engines and my ALEXA app on my tablet. I don't want to say it because it'll turn around. But nothing came back. But it did say in the research that it's been reported throughout history. So as far as when someone first really started taking a look at the topic, it was really in the 20th century. And one of the first ones to take a look at deathbed visitations seriously was Sir William Barrett, who was a professor of physics at the Royal College of Science in Dublin, Ireland. And he is highly respected for one, was. I'm sure he's no longer alive anymore. So going back into, you finally found me. Yeah, we're always in the group, Renee. If you wait a minute for the feed to start, just keep periodically refreshing the page. Just pull down on it with your finger and then let it go, and you'll see the buffering sign, like the circle sign, on the top where it's kind of reloading a page. And worst case, go over to YouTube and watch us there. If you can't find us here, go on Soma Fusion channel on YouTube. We are there as well live. So or Soma Fusion page on Facebook is another option. Katie also shares it onto her personal page as well. So kind of everywhere on Facebook and YouTube. So Sir William Barrett in 1926, he published a summation of he did research on deathbed visitations, and it was something he just kept noticing people mentioning, talking about, experiencing. So he started looking into it. So he published his summation of his findings in a book called Deathbed Visions in 1926. Actually, I went into the old feed. Well, the only time you have to really worry about that, Renee, is if you go into like the announcements tab. I always save the most recent week's shows in there. However, on the night of the news show, I always end up letting that out of being pinned to the top. So it should only have in there the Friday night show where I was dressed up and stuff. Yeah, Mary usually makes it in when she's done working. So he wrote this book and published it called Deathbed Visions. So he noted really surprising similarities and unexplained aspects of the experiences that are not easily explained by any other methods or means as to being what it is. That's the one you hit. Yeah, that one's still pinned to the top, but it should be in the announcements tab because I have the reminder for the show notice pinned to the top of the page. Hey, Marianne. So what were his findings? So Dr. Barrett found, Sir Dr. Barrett, he found that He noted that it wasn't uncommon for the dying to identify friends and relatives who they thought were still alive in many cases, because you got to remember back in the early 1900s, there was no internet to communicate with people. You were reliant on snail mail and or telegrams to be notified when there happened to be a death in the family or of a friend. So it could take a while before they found out that someone actually died, and it could be months after they died before you even got the news. And so, like, they were seeing people. He was finding that people were reporting seeing their friends and family who had already died, but in most cases they weren't even aware that they had. You were early. Yeah, we always start within, 5, no later than 5 or 8, but we aim for about 8 o'clock. So, so, oh, someone's missing. Okay. So again, it could take weeks or months to be notified of deaths and within families, friends, loved ones. And Barrett also found it curious that often children expressed, and here's one thing I found interesting that he did note, which makes sense, surprised that angels seen in their dying moments don't have any wings. Now, if a deathbed visitation is just a hallucination, wouldn't they see them as popular literature and artwork represents them as being in those places, like storybooks, what have you? Because that would be their only sense of what they are. And yet children would have a deathbed visit and report, hey, I see an angel there. Don't you see them? But they never had any wings when asked to describe them. And so if it was something we were just kind of pulling out of our heads from a dying brain, it would be using that information that we already have stored through our memories of having encountered before. And children don't report them as having wings. So that is something from literature and artwork, storybooks, etc. My grandma sent everyone out of the room because grandpa was there. Interesting. And so she had one as well. So, and I thought that was a really good point. Anyways, that again, you're only going to, if it was just something made up or a hallucination had by the dying brain, in its final moments, it would be drawing from the known knowledge that you have contained in your memories, which would be, whatever is shown in what you've encountered. And again, 1926, well, they didn't have active TV shows and cable and the internet and everything else back then. So it was mainly would have been like storybooks or the Bible. And of course, in many Bible illustrations show angels having wings. So that's what they would see if it was just a hallucination that was occurring from a dying brain, which is the scientific argument a lot of times regarding what these are. So more extensive research was carried out in the 1960s and 70s by a Dr. Carlos Ossis, I think is how you say his name, of the American Society of Psychical Research. So Dr. Ossis published a book of his research findings in a 1977 book called At the Hour of Death. My grandma's seen 2 different things, a naked woman sitting on the couch after a large cruise ship and later a large cruise ship. Interesting. My dad's seen his cousins on the other side of a fence. So I'm wondering if to him the fence was representative of being the other side. Were his cousins crossed over at the time, Sandy? And to Tanya, I would ask, did your grandma, like at any time, go on a cruise ship? Just curious. Like, is that, because I do imagine you could draw things from your own memory to add to what you're seeing, possibly, but yeah, they were. Okay. So, but again, he showed the children, they're never talked about as angels having wings in their descriptions of what they're seeing. And I just got kicked out of the group. Thanks, Facebook. I gotta say too, while I pull that back up and jump back in, I absolutely love what the new background is for Halloween for the the avatars we can make on Facebook. Those amuse me. Never went as far as I knew, but really giggled at the naked lady. I'm sure. Did she know the naked lady? Do you know? Out of curiosity. So Dr. Ossis, he interviewed more than 1,000 doctors, nurses, and others in attendance of the dying, and researched thousands of case studies that existed before, when he started his research. And I am still here, but on my phone, I got booted out of Facebook for monitoring chat. Nope, she didn't. Interesting. It could have been a guide or somebody as well. Like, I don't know what she saw without tuning into her, but it could have been. So Dr. Ossis, he went ahead and interviewed more than 1,000 doctors, nurses, and others in attendance of the dying, and he researched thousands of case studies. And what he found was that although some dying people reported seeing angels or other religious icons or symbols, like people, whether it was Christ or God or, I don't know, whatever was their thing that represented their belief system, and even very occasionally mythological figures, some could report that. Yeah, exactly. It's Facebook acting up. The vast majority claimed to see familiar people whom had previously crossed over. And again, people may or may not have known that they were already crossed over. Very often, friends and relatives seem expressed directly that they're there to help take them away and to guide them where they need to go. And also that the dying person is reassured by the experience and expresses great happiness with the vision. Now, this was contrasted with confusion or fear that they had experienced at seeing, say, a ghost or a spirit figure in a paranormal experience. The dying are quite willing to go with them. And again, it brings them peace and happiness to know that they are seeing a loved one. Thank you, Stacy, for sharing. So that is a difference in that, to where, if you were to see an apparition, sorry, I got a cat hair on my lip. If you saw an apparition, I don't know, in some haunted place, some people can find that quite startling. Whereas in the deathbed visions, it's very calming and it tends to induce a very peaceful and releases the fear that they may have about actually crossing over and making that transition, because it reassures them that, hey, my loved ones are here and I haven't seen them in a long time, and the peace and calm comes over them. And it's usually not that long after they see these things that they do actually die. And that the dying person's mood, even state of health, can seem to change. They can see it and actually light up for a little bit before, and kind of look like they may be returning to health again prior to actually going, because that kind of, it catches them off guard, I think. And even though some may believe and hope that they will see their loved ones again, seeing is believing, as the old saying goes. So it's kind of one of those things that I think that's what validates to them that it's not done and over with. So a few hours later that your dad passed. Yeah. And that's really common, Sandy. Everything, the longest out of any case studies I researched for the show tonight was maybe within 2 days the person died, typically, but normally shorter periods of time from when they first experienced it to when they actually crossed over. And in talking about like the person's experiences and their health seeming to change. So during the visions, the person may have been, who was dying, may once have been depressed prior to that experience, or be pain riddled and just miserable and in a horrible state. But they're overcome with elation and they're actually end up being relieved of the pain until they cross over. Dr. Ossis also found that people having these experiences did not seem to be hallucinating or in an altered state of consciousness. Instead, they seem quite aware of their real surroundings and their conditions going on around them. Now, whether or not the dying believes in an afterlife is irrelevant. The experiences and the reactions all tend to be the same. I had patients that saw family members for a week before they died. Yeah, so like I said, it could be, the longest I noted in my research was like up to 2 days before, or a week at the longest, but then most of it's more closer to right afterward they go. Next morning, Tanya said, heard a knock at the door, looked, and no one was there. My sister checked on Grandma, and she was gone. There were a couple of experiences interspersed with like people's experiences that I read about that did talk about people, like who are in attendance, whether it's in a medical situation where doctors, nurses, aides, that type of thing, or family members, but experiencing the apparitions they saw as well, them seeing them and or paranormal activity occurring with it. Days before my grandfather passed, said Stacy, he was calling out to his past siblings. Yeah, and so it doesn't seem to be just a hallucination happening. They're actually seeing and experiencing this when inquired, like, what do you see? Or, who are you talking to? They describe who and exactly what they're seeing. So let's look at some statistics about this. So just how many people have had these deathbed visitations? Because again, it's not every single dying person has it occur, but about 10% of dying people are conscious shortly before their death. The rest, can be unconscious from disease or in a coma or what have you. It's a sudden death. But those that, are kind of moving into death, there's about 10% that have these experiences. But out of that 10%, 50 to 60% experiencing these, or say that they're experiencing these visions. The visions seem to last for about 5 minutes, give or take, mainly by the dying gradually by a like terminal illness or a life-threatening injury, like the person's on their way out and they start to experience this. And so over half of those who do have the experiences, they seem to last for about 5 minutes. So what are deathbed visitations? And how can they be explained? Because of course science, science wants to say that they are a certain thing, which they haven't got all those answers figured out yet. So are they delusions made by any sort of drugs in the system of the patient? Nancy said, I should have added, they also talked to them and pointed. Yeah, and that's quite common in the reports of that, to say like, or they notice that the person is looking off into a corner, can even be up, ceiling level corner, it's or right beside them. And I mean, it varies where, but they indicate where they're looking at. Stacy said, my sister-in-law told me before my mother-in-law passed, she was in and out of consciousness. And right before she passed, she opened her eyes and said, I have to go. I have personal experience. I include a bunch of the different ones towards in the second half of the show. And there is one similar to that actually, where the person kept repeating, I have to go, I have to go, I'm going, I have to go. And then they went. So the doctors would wonder, are these delusions made by any sort of drugs that are in the patient's system, or hallucinations produced by the dying brain? Or can they be exactly as they are presented to be, a welcoming committee of our dead loved ones who have come to help us transition to the afterlife? So many in the scientific community wants to put them off as a creation of the dying brain, sort of like a sedative that's self-induced to ease the dying process, is what science kind of, their stance on it, is that the brain produces these images to help the person feel better right before they die. And in refuting science, if it were only self-induced hallucinations from our brain, then why would the dying brain only produce visions of people who are already dead, whether we knew they were dead or not? Like, why wouldn't it be, a friend or, I don't know, a sibling who lives across the country or something, but are still perfectly alive? They don't ever report seeing that. It's always someone who has crossed over. Even if the person who's dying doesn't know that they have died, they're still reporting seeing them. Hey, Karen, it is. It's kind of ignorance. Grab a drink. And also, they noted that many people who experience deathbed visitations aren't on any kind of medications and are quite coherent when they experience these things. And people who are medicated do also experience the visions, and they are similar to their non-medicated, the comparisons they make to someone who isn't medicated versus someone is, the experiences are pretty much the same things. So medications don't seem to have an impact on it one way or the other. So it's not like the person's just stoned out of their mind or something and hallucinating it because of that. So even if they are heavily medicated to be kept comfortable, they still report the same things. Hey, Mary, welcome home. So the best evidence for deathbed visitation. So like many things that are experienced by people, there's no hard, tangible evidence for these visions. It's not something that, they can take a photograph of and capture the image of them, but also, or as I always say, science hasn't pierced the veil of the other side yet. And nor have they got human consciousness figured out. They have started studying it to try to figure out what part of the brain human consciousness emanates from, and to try to see, is there actually provable life after death. So research is being done on it, but it's not a done deal yet. They don't have these answers yet. They don't know what happens on the other side, and they don't have it all figured out, or, and science looks at it as something that can be reproducible by anybody on demand. Well, when someone's dying, you can't force something like that to occur, but it doesn't mean it's not happening. Karen says, if consciousness is even in the brain. That was my thinking when I heard about that research, was like, well, how do they even know it's based there? Stacy said, also, when I had my near-death experience, I was in the hospital room and I felt my grandmother and family members. I hear someone sitting in a chair. When I was sitting in the hospital bed, I heard them getting out of the chair and saw the door open and close by itself. Nice, neat, really neat. Yeah, I mean, for me personally, especially as a psychic medium, I don't doubt that happens. I'm in touch with the people from the other side, so I know they're there. But can I pick it up and, say, this is the spirit of a dead person, like hand somebody something? No, of course not. But, and I think it goes beyond having faith too. Hey, Brenda. So again, science hasn't pierced that veil yet, but they are starting to at least examine it. I don't think they're going to find those answers ever. However, I don't think it's what they say it is either in their speculation. So on rare occasions, the entities are seen not just by the dying person, but also by people in attendance of the death. So here's one story from 1904. So according to a case document in the February 1904 Journal of the Society for Psychic Research, a deathbed apparition was seen by a dying woman named Harriet Pearson, which, interestingly enough, when I was trying to get that answered question, dyslexic Donna, what? Question answered about, like, are there any recordings of deathbed visions being mentioned in any ancient texts, etc.? And I asked my ALEXA app that question. This is the case study that came up on it. No matter how many different ways I asked, this is the answer I got from it. So a deathbed apparition was seen by a dying woman named Harriet Pearson and by 3 relatives who were also in the room, and also 2 witnesses in attendance of a dying young boy. Both independently claimed to see the spirit of his mother at his bedside. And so, meaning that they're not looking at each other saying, what did you see? I saw this. They're both saying, like, let's describe it separately, or they're questioned separately, and they're giving the same answer. This is what they both saw and experienced. So Brenda says, when my mom was dying, she saw my dad sitting on the side of her bed. Yeah, that's a deathbed visitation. Exactly. So Parting Visions by Melvin Morse. Morse writes that these visions help empower the dying person to remove fear of death, as well as to be hugely healing to the relatives who hear them describe what they're seeing. Which many times during readings and things, people are hugely concerned about the well-being of their loved one who's crossed over. Are they okay? Is something I get asked regularly. And, people want to know that someone's not suffering after they die, or that they made it on, or is there something in the afterlife even? Because many people are skeptical of that. Marianne says, can you have someone appear and you fear it's your time, but they shake their head no and sit by your bedside like waiting? I did get one experience that I came across that reported a woman having seen a deathbed vision, and she was doing very poorly. Like, the staff really thought she was going on her way out, but she was told it wasn't her time, and right after that, she immediately started recovering, and all of her vital signs got way better. Her color came back to her skin and stuff, and she continued to live for like another 5 years or something. So like that can happen. I've not heard of them staying sitting by the bedside, but they did encounter them who told them it wasn't time yet. I mean, there are people who say that they've experienced it when they're not dying, and it scared the crap out of them because they weren't ready. Then they had fear about dying, and so when they encountered it, it was kind of like almost like the fear of seeing the Grim Reaper. That could be a terrifying experience for some people. And so if you saw that, you'd be full of panic that, hey, I'm going to be dying here, even when there's no signs that you're going to, that it's going to happen unexpectedly and they're there to collect you or whatever. But, like I said, I did come across one similar to that. So in Psychology Today article that was by Marilyn Mendoza, who's a PhD, back in 2016, she wrote an article that was in there. And she said, mothers tend to be more frequently appearing figure that gets seen. Brenda said, on a near-death experience that I had, I saw my Grammy and she told me it wasn't my time and I was sent back. Interesting. He waited. I have bad COPD. Well, obviously it wasn't your time though, Marianne. So she said that mothers frequently appear like being the most frequently seen person that the dying person sees is your mother if she's crossed over. Mary says, when I was in the hospital in 2012-13 from a hernia strangulation to my colon, they thought I was going to die. I had dreams and stuff. That's common as well, like deathbed visits through dream time. Sandy said, I almost passed in the hospital and had a friend tell me it wasn't my time. Was the friend alive or were they crossed over, Sandy? Because see, that's the key, is that the person is dying, but they see, their loved ones and relatives standing, or friends even, who have crossed over standing there. And, many people don't see it, but they clearly see it, and it brings them peace. If it, death or dream time visits from our loved ones, that's something a little bit different than this is. No, she crossed over. Yeah. So I would say that you had a deathbed visitation yourself. So mothers tend to be the most frequently appearing figure who gets seen in these visitations. And sometimes that person is also accompanied by a deceased pet at times. And Mendoza states that after relatives, angels and religious icons are the second most frequently reported. She says that both type of visions instill an extreme peace and calm over the person, and it's not usually more than a couple of days after when the person does die. So I do have a bunch of different examples regarding real life deathbed visitation, and it was frustrating me when I was trying to get all this written out because it would come up in a search for that. So I would assume that everything stated in this post was examples of it, when in reality they had other experiences like you guys are mentioning interspersed with it, and they are slightly different. Karen said, I hope my friend Heather comes to get me dressed like the Grim Reaper. I know she's reading this too. Hint, hint, Heather. I could see her doing something like that. That's funny. So, real life deathbed visitation stories here or experiences reported by people or the person's loved ones. So, a daughter reports that her mom was coherent and not delusional. She had congestive heart failure and lung and kidney cancer that had metastasized and gone throughout her body, which is what metastasized means, is that it's spread, from its source, its origin source throughout your body. So she says, one morning about 2 a.m. in the hospital room, my mom stared out the door of her room. Mama, what do you see? I asked. Don't you see them? She said. They walk the hall day and night. They are dead. She said this with quiet calmness. She goes on to say, the night of her passing, after I brought her home to die, she was past the point of any treatment. She was restless and anxious. A few minutes after 8 p.m., she said, I have to go. They're here. They're here waiting for me. Her face glowed and the color returned to her pale face. She actually attempted to raise up and to stand. And her last words were, I have to go. It's beautiful. And then she passed away at 8 p.m. And that's told by someone who used the name of Moon Sister. The next one is All the Visitors. And as told by a woman named Billy, quote, my mom died of cancer 3 years ago, and she was at home on the sofa where she wanted to be instead of a hospital. She didn't have much pain and was only on oxygen to help her breathe and wasn't on any drugs. The last day of her life, she looked around and asked who all the people were standing around looking at her. Only my dad and I were in the room. I often wonder why she didn't recognize any of them, but hope they were relatives or angels. Also, one of my friends who died saw angels and was reaching toward them. Yet another saw something he said was so beautiful, but he didn't say what. I find this very comforting and interesting. And that was by Billy. And like I said, there were other experiences mixed in, which frustrated me because I'd get like half a page written out of notes and then realize, no, this isn't a deathbed visit. Okay, Mary. And would have to start and find another one. And that happened 2 or 3 times to where I had to make sure I read them thoroughly before I wrote them out. So the next one is Uncle Charlie. I found the subject of deathbed visitations oddly reassuring as my Uncle Timmy died this morning at 7:30 a.m. The book Embraced by the Light by Betty J. Eady was on a near-death experience, and so is the book Heaven is for Real. Yeah, near-death experiences are slightly different than this too, because this is, again, where the person does actually die. They're not coming back after, they don't come back. I found the subject of deathbed visitation oddly reassuring as my Uncle Timmy died this morning at 7:30 a.m. He has been ill with terminal cancer for over 2 years now, and we knew the end was near. My aunt said he knew it was time and asked his son-in-law to cut his hair and trim his beard, then asked to be bathed. My aunt sat with him all night. A few hours before he died, he said, Uncle Charlie, you're here. I can't believe it. He proceeded to talk to Uncle Charlie right up until the end and told my aunt that Uncle Charlie had come to help him over to the other side. His Uncle Charlie was his favorite uncle and the only significant other in my uncle's life who had passed on. So I believe Uncle Charlie did come to take Uncle Timmy to the other side, and it brings me great comfort. And that's by a woman named Alicia Z. The next is Mom helps him cross over. My brother-in-law was dying. He awoke from a nap and asked his wife if she had seen who had pinched his toe and woke him. She replied that no one had been in the room but her. He said he'd been pretty sure that it had been his mom, who was deceased when this happened, that was how she used to wake me up for school. He said that he had seen her leave the room and that she had long black hair like when he was young. In a short while, he seemed to focus on something on the foot of his bed, smiled, and died. And that was just an initial name with the letter B for the initial of the person who wrote it. Number 5 is The Beautiful Garden. In 1974, I was in my grandfather's hospital room holding his hand. He had had 5 heart attacks during a 3-day period. And he looked up at the ceiling and said, "Oh, look at those beautiful flowers." I looked up and there was only a bare light bulb. Then he actually went on to have another heart attack and the machine screamed. The nurses ran in and they revived him and put him on a pacemaker. He died about 4 days later. He wanted to go to that beautiful garden, and that was by Kay. Number 6, The Baby's Angels. When my uncle was a 2-year-old baby, he caught scarlet fever and was dying. His mother, my grandmother, was rocking him on the front porch. When suddenly he reached both his arms up as if to be held by someone, and there was no one there, and said, "Mama, the angels are here for me." And at that moment, he died in her arms. And that was by Tim W. The next, I'm Coming Home. My mom, who was terminally ill with cancer, spent the last week of her life in the hospital. That week, she would repeat, "I'm coming home, I'm coming home." While I sat with her, she kept looking to my right side and began to talk to her sister who had passed over the previous year. It was a normal conversation, just as we would have, and she commented on how I'd grown to look just like her, meaning my mom, but that I looked tired. Needless to say, I had a sense of relief to know that the visions of her family were giving her peace and allaying any fears she had of crossing over, and that was by Kim M. Yeah, I almost gave a little bit of a warning before I did the show, because for some people, the ways that people are reporting their loved ones crossed over could be triggering to some people. So sorry for not giving a warning. Number 8 is finishing out the week. Mom was almost 96. She suffered a broken hip in January of 1989 and went from the hospital into the nursing home. She just gave up. My mom was born in a small village in Poland and had little or no schooling, and came to this country with Dad when she was 17, not knowing a word of English. She owned her own home. She lived all those years and had no fear of anyone or anything. A great spirit in the small lady. This one Saturday, I sat with her for a while, and suddenly these blue eyes of hers opened wide. She looked at a corner of her room. Exactly, you guys chose the topic. Come on, separate page here. So she looked to the corner of her room and then to the ceiling. She was legally blind. She looked terribly startled at first, but as her eyes swept around the room, she put both hands under her chin and settled right down. I swear I saw a light around her. The gray hair and the pained facial expression disappeared, and she was beautiful. She closed her eyes. I wanted to ask her in Polish what she saw, but something stopped me. I just sat there and looked at her. It was approaching evening, and I had told the people there that if my mother appeared to be dying, to inform me, and I decided to leave. I bent over my mother and kissed her on the forehead. A voice within my head said very clearly, "This is the last time you'll see your mother alive." Sorry, the last time you'll see your mother alive. But something still made me leave. That night, as I was asleep, I dreamed my mother was behind me and shaking me hard by the shoulders, trying to wake me up. She finally did, and I woke up at midnight to the phone ringing. It was the nursing home telling me that my mom had just passed away, and just the initial S. Yeah, me too, Karen. Number 9, September 2011. I work in a long-term care and have seen my share of deaths. We were in Helen's room, and she was a cranky old Southern lady, but we all liked her. She was getting sicker by the day. One afternoon, the aide came out and said, "You better come in here." So a few of us went in basically to say goodbye. Her pressure was falling. Her pulse was weak and thready. She was gray colored. She was looking up at the corner of the ceiling, nodding her head, saying, "I'll be right along." I asked her who she was talking to. She told me it was her mom and dad and the Archbishop. Then she asked one of us to take her hand and make the sign of the cross for her because she was too weak to move. So since it was an archbishop, I'm guessing it was Catholic. So she wanted them to pick up her hand and make the sign of the cross on her. She then looked to the other side of the room and said, "Oh, okay. Who are you talking to now?" I asked. It was the Great One. He told me there are still people out here who need me. The color then returned to her face. Her blood pressure came back up. Her pulse normalized. She recovered and lived 5 more years. Don't tell me it was only a chemical reaction. I know what I saw, and I know what I believe. So I'm guessing that's by a nurse by the description of the other people involved, but no name was left. And number 10, an elderly relative kept calling out the names of my late grandfather, cousin, and other deceased relatives. My grandmother claims to have been visited by her deceased relatives before she passed on. Yeah, I know, Nancy. I think that is the only case I've ever heard of someone completely recovering when they were that close to death. And, again, I find these valid because I talk to them too. So, I would believe that if that happened to me as well. And I expect I'll see a whole gaggle of people when my time comes. Let's see. Okay, let me start that one over again. An elderly relative kept calling out the names of my late grandfather, cousin, and other deceased relatives. My grandmother claims to have been visited by her deceased relatives before she passed on. I'm using the word claimed, quote unquote, as I take these stories with a pinch of salt, but please explain whether this is real, and if so, what I should do. That was by someone named Peter. So he's, he knows that people who've had these experiences, he hasn't put much stock into them, but now he's kind of questioning, was this actually something or not? So Deathbed Visitation has been being discussed and relayed for untold number of years. Excuse me, but again, the only reference I could find as to when it was seriously looked at was again by the Sir William Barrett in 1926. But all of the research kept saying that it's been reported on for, since ancient times. But I couldn't get any specific examples of it for you. So, and you already answered this question of have any of you experienced this with any of your loved ones, which many of you actually have. I personally have not experienced it myself. In anyone I've either been near, I mean, I have the ability to tell when it's close to someone's time, but I've not been there at the moment of death, and nor did those particular people have any experiences. Karen says, my mother did 60 plus times. She never had an experience that she remembered. You'd think after flatlining so much, she'd have one. Well, Karen, what you had said, or what you missed before you came in, is that in the research done by, I believe it was by the Sir William Barrett, was that only like 10% of people who are dying actually have these experiences. But of those 10%, 50 to 60% of them have, seen this, and this, he was reporting in his book that he wrote. So it's not like everybody has them. I mean, that many times, yes, you might think that, hey, why aren't you seeing it after that many times? But that it isn't something that happens to everyone. And I'm not sure, without asking them on the other side, like why such a small sample of people. I mean, I can certainly, ask Timote and see what he says about it, which I hadn't done yet, but maybe she just didn't remember. Well, that's the thing, Lori, is that these things are not, people are awake and lucid when they have these experiences. So it's not like it's, like a deathbed dream where you're unconscious and the person's coming for a dream time visit. So like, it is something you're seeing when you're awake and you're cognizant. So it's different than a dream time visitation. Miss my zombie mom. Aw. But he also did report that of what you missed, Karen, is that people who've even, like, science kind of says, oh, it's something that your brain makes up as to help ease the passing, like a self-soothing technique. However, it happens even on someone who's highly medicated, as much as people who aren't on anything, that the experiences are the same regardless whether you're on drugs or not or whatever. So I would say out of the 13 who are in here watching, I mean, it sounds like at least close to half of you have had, or experiences yourself or knew somebody in your family who had that experience. So that's actually a pretty high sample of people from 13. I mean, it's up to you guys if you want me to ask to see if I get an answer as to why. I certainly can if y'all want me to, but otherwise that's pretty much the bulk of the information. After that, within 2 different search engines, it just was repeating the exact same information I already presented to you, the same books and same stories written, unless it was involving like something somebody got told during a reading or something like that, which to me is not the same as what the rest of it is. So I didn't include any of that. But other than that, that's really it. My curiosity is piqued. Ask away. Okay. Well, you can certainly ask too, Karen. Just saying. Okay, so Timote, you are here in the show. What do you think, or do you have an answer for why some people experience deathbed visions of their loved ones who've crossed over and others do not? He's saying that you have to be at least somewhat open to there being something after you die. If you're overly skeptical, you're not as likely to experience one, or you're just not 100% sure if what does exist for an afterlife. So based on your personal belief system, are you an atheist, or like, do you think there's absolutely nothing when you die, or you'd like to believe but you're still kind of like on the fence about it, or you're not sure, is going to have an influence on whether you experience it or not, or you're going to be closed off to having that type of an experience where you're just too scared to have that door be open. And as with most things that we do, fear is a huge thing that holds people back with anything in this realm of having experiences. So, and by the way, is Sandy Griffin here? I don't recall seeing her, and if so, she's been really quiet for the show. She's gonna be mad if she missed it. Oh goodness, let me double check. I see Sandy Miller and Nancy, Lori, Tanya, Stacy, Kim. I don't think she's here. Oh my goodness, she's gonna flip out that she missed a show. Was she here? I just was thinking in the back of my head, oh, you are here, Sandy. Okay. I was like, goodness, if she missed one, that I've been thinking that for a while, but I was reading and didn't say it, but I was kind of like, I did notice. I'm glad you were able to see it then, and you just have been quiet, it's all. So anybody have any experiences, Sandy? Quiet Sandy is right. Like, she's not usually quite that quiet for a show. Like, geez, actually, she's not been in. And I know the one death I was in attendance for was my mother, and she was already like mostly gone by the time her death actually came. I mean, one pupil was already dilated. She'd been in a coma for a few days at that point. So, if she was seeing or experiencing anything, she wasn't able to verbalize it. I believe my husband's smile after he passed away was to let me know that he met loved ones. Aw. Yes, says Sandy. Okay. Is everything okay, Sandy? To validate Karen's question. I think it all depends on the manner of death as well. Yeah, like, they have to be it says it's pretty much common in terminally ill patients, or, someone who's kind of dying, not slowly, but it's a gradual process rather than a sudden death or an accidental death, or, where the person's awake and they're aware. Everything's fine. Okay. Hey, Ted, you missed it, dude. So I always had this knack so for many years, that was always my go-to sub-career, I'll call it. If I was in between a job or what have you, waiting on a job to, waiting on word, did I get a job, what have you. I used to do home health care, and I always knew when someone was close to crossing over, but I was never actually present when it occurred. It always would happen like the next shift after me, or over the weekend I happened to be off or whatever, but I always knew. And I would actually warn the families, to say, if you're going to have anybody come and, you want to be close during this time, it would be a good time, because it's not going to be long. I guess there's a difference between near death and actual deathbed visits, but every patient I was with that was dying slowly had visitations. There is a difference between near death experiences, because in that, the person actually is declared clinically dead for however long. Like, there is no heartbeat that's registering, nor any brain activity. So they have clinically died, and then they bring them back. So the person has experiences after with whatever they saw whilst they were clinically dead. And dream time visitation, our loved ones do come and check in with us and via dream time experiences. So that is still different than, being awake. And that's what this is the person's awake when they are seeing these things in the room with them. And once in a blue moon, there have been a few instances recorded where somebody did see what they were seeing, but it wasn't overall just they see them, but they're awake and aware, and they're not at all like, zombified or something, or comatose. I mean, they're awake for the experiences. Welcome back, Mary. Yeah, Dreamtime visits are special and they're quite a gift when you have them, but it is a bit different than deathbed visits. So again, it always happens within a short period of time before the person actually does cross over, and they are seeing, and it brings about a sense of peace and calm, and they're assured, of course. Why wouldn't you be, to know that people you haven't seen in however long since they died, that you're going to finally have a chance to be reunited with them again, and that things that you believed all your life are actually true. Me too. And even though it's sad when you have to say goodbye again for Dreamtime visits, it's still quite a gift, and I wouldn't trade it for anything when it happens. So it's like, oh yeah, okay, so big deal. I cried, so don't stop coming to see me because I cried. It was hard saying goodbye again, but at the same time, like, I'm happy to have had the gift of it, and thank you. So that is Deathbed Visitation. Like I said, any other resource I found between two different search engines, all just kept referencing and bringing up the exact same information I just gave you all. So I wasn't going to just repeat it, obviously. I was told it was not my time and that I could not stay. That was one of the reported messages, Kim. I have attended more passings than I dare count. Yeah, I just always seem to miss them in terms of, like, I knew it was going to happen and soon, but it would always be after I left. There was an elderly gentleman I had taken care of for several months, and he had, I believe it was Parkinson's disease. And I knew, and I think he did too. He was very quiet about it, but I think he knew. And, I warned the nurse who was in charge of all of us who were taking care of him, let his family know it won't be that long. And he crossed over actually the next shift right after me, like within 2 hours after I went home. And another instance, I was providing home care for a woman who had severe dementia, and I knew when it was time, and I told her daughter, who was in charge of us taking care of her, that, like, if any family is going to be informed, please start making those calls because it won't be long. And it was always within like a day or two. So were you a nurse, Nancy, then? I take it. I hated working in facilities in the way that people got treated like herds of cows, or less than, even, in many instances. So I would never work in a institution. Yeah, I got that impression, but I wasn't positive. Yeah, I really despised working in a nursing home, so I always did like adult homes or at-home care instead, because it was much more humane, and I couldn't tolerate hurting elderly people like, farm animals or something, and treating anybody that way with that lack of respect. It angered me, but it also hurt my heart too. So that was my always my go-to in between jobs thing. So there we have it, Deathbed Visitation. I know it was a slightly shorter show. However, like I said, that was really all that was known about the topic, and any major works that were written about it. I worked in nursing homes and long-term rehabs. Yeah, I love my patients too. And unfortunately, in like a nursing home environment, it didn't allow for personal relationships with the person. Again, you had 15 minutes to go in, get them up and bathed, bed bath for the day, and dressed and ready to go for the day, and their bed made in 15 minutes. And that's not realistic. Tanya said we knew the signs when Dad was ready, modeling and respiratory blood pressure. He waited till Mom and I went to smoke and left us. They do, a person does choose who's present and when they cross. And if someone is present, they don't really want to have them see it, then they'll wait. absolutely. That happens all the time, actually. So, you know, that's common. And, you know, we are left wondering, like, why did you go? And, you know, I just was right there. Why you couldn't wait 5 minutes? Well, no, they chose it because they didn't want that to be your last memory of them, was in those final breaths. And that's their free will choice to go then. And I respect it, you know. And by the same token, I look at it with the ones that I knew were going to happen, but I wasn't present for, is that I wasn't meant to be present, but I did my job in terms of informing the family and passing on what I knew, that it was happening, and like, now is the time, in order to tell their families to get people in if they were coming to say goodbye, to give people that opportunity, because they would always seem completely clueless that it was happening. And I'm like, how can you not feel it? And they never could. The last place I worked was assisted living. Yeah. Yeah, I hated it, and I wouldn't do it. Adult homes, I didn't mind, you know, where it was kind of like assisted living, that I didn't have any problem with, but that would be the closest to a nursing home I would come again. My mom waited until after I left. She knew how hard I was taking it. Absolutely, Brendan. I know somebody else I am very close to, her mother was the same thing. They had no choice but to put her into a facility. She had some rare, unusual type of brain cancer, and it just was impossible to manage taking care of her anymore at home by themselves, and medically even, and providing to meet her needs. So they had to put her in a nursing home. And literally, she just left the facility and got to, like, before she even got out the parking lot, they came running after her saying that she just crossed. And she was devastated and angry about it. And I said, no, 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 don't be, because they chose that. She didn't want you there in the final moments. That was her choice to make. So don't be angry about that. And that, you know, they didn't want some big, long, drawn out, horribly sad, scarring goodbye given. They didn't want that. And they can choose that. That's their right. So he's back. It's okay. So, you know, it is something we choose. All right, so the next Willows spent is going to be episode 163, and that'll be on the 25th, next Monday. So, oh, it's Labor Day in New Zealand, I guess. Okay. I saw the small print on my calendar, but I wasn't sure what it said. So, topics for next week that we have to vote on. This the psychotronics, which I kind of got an abbreviated definition of it. It deals with the science of matter, energy, and consciousness together, I guess. We still had the bizarre cases of mass hysteria, and what are the different pyramids, or not pyramids, like triangles of the world, like, you know, like the Bermuda Triangle, the Alaskan Triangle. What are all the different ones in the world? I've had some hang on till kids from out of town got there, but would wait till they went out of the room to die. Yeah, exactly, Nancy. In every case that I told them to call the family managed to get there in time. Excuse me. With the example of the elderly gentleman I took care of, he passed like the next shift, but he didn't really have any family left anyway to come in from out of town. So probably was better, but it freaked out the woman who had the shift after me, because she really liked the night shift in that it was really quiet and she didn't have to do anything. She was one of those people. So it really bothered her that he went on her shift. Hi, baby girl. All right, so Lori wants, ow, not there on my knee. Ow, ow, ow. I love you, but don't step there. It feels like someone kicks me when she does that. Okay, so Lori wants mass hysteria. Renee wants mass hysteria. Stacy wants the different triangles. Yeah, I misspoke because my notes, I keep abbreviating it as like a pyramid shaped triangle. So I read it as pyramid, but it's actually one of the different triangles of the world, like the Bermuda Triangle, the Alaskan Triangle. Sandy's same one, different triangles. Sandy says triangles. See, I said pyramids, now you guys all are. Sorry. Mary got it right, triangles, okay. And that's why, Lori, I didn't add any new topics for this week and left the same 3 from last week on. Brenda says mass hysteria, okay. So again, we have the psychotronics, the different triangles of the world, and bizarre cases of mass hysteria. Yeah, you're not alone, the only one who wants it. Karen says the triangular pyramids. Tanya says mass hysteria. You're welcome, Lori. Now, do you guys, okay, that was going to be my next question. If nobody wants the psychotronics, do you want me to drop it off the list and replace it with a different one for next week? I can, if there is no interest in it, but it was the way that it got used, the word got used, it got my attention in the video I was watching, and I was like, what's that? And they made it sound like it was something really big and not good the way it was being looked at or used. And I was kind of, yeah, that's not good. Marianne says mass hysteria. Katie, do you have a vote? So we so far have a tie between the different triangles in bizarre cases of mass hysteria. And we have one troublesome kitty who's in the way. Katie says mass hysteria. In the way, yes. So she can be the tiebreaker, I guess. Can you scooch so you're not in the way, baby girl? Sounds over my head. The psychotronics, like I said, it's dealing with like the science of matter, energy, and consciousness. But I think it's how they're especially governments, I'm sure, or those types of organizations are using that to research, or the researching on the methods they're researching it with. Sounded kind of not good. So, Mary needs to vote too. My son James said the triangles as well. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, Mary did vote already. She was the first one who recorded the triangles correctly rather than my use of pyramids by misreading my abbreviations. Well, it's not misreading it technically because it is a pyramid shape, but I know what I mean in the end. All right, so it looks like no, wait a minute. We got a tie. We got a tie. Okay, so I'll have to flip a coin then. We have a tie between mass hysteria and the different triangles of the world. You too, Miss Sandy, my quiet one. I feel like something isn't that great with you, but you're not saying, so I won't press, but just a feeling I have. But I love you. And whatever it is, I hope it isn't anything too awful. Okay, tiebreaker. Thank you, Lori. We got the tiebreaker. Don't go anywhere yet. Kim's saying the pyramids. Okay, so then, I did it again. Pyramids. Triangles. Kim says triangles. Nancy says she changes her vote to triangles. Okay. Sandy changes to mass hysterical. Okay, so then that breaks the tie, and we have the different triangles of the world for next week. I need a doll. You guys are very welcome. Thank you for coming. Wednesday, we got book group. Now, we had originally started one of the Edgar Casey books. However, the methods of how he delivers his readings are much more like reading passages from the Old Testament and the Bible. Very like symbolic in nature and just very difficult to get through. So I happen to have a book on hand regarding fairies and little people of the world. Let me grab my book to tell you that exact. It's a field guide to the little people book, and that I happen to have on hand. So we started reading this last week, but it's really just like it's okay if you missed the first night of it, because it really is just going through each kind of little being from the world and the legends surrounding them and so forth. So anybody can jump in at any time and doesn't have to worry about it if they didn't miss the start of it. So at any rate, that's what we started doing. You're very welcome, Nancy. Yeah, Karen was not off on that at all. So yeah, Tanya, we did start that because we started Casey and we got into it. We're kind of like, boy, this is like reading the Old Testament. And we were kind of struggling with some of it. And we're like, God, this is going to take forever to get through. Yep, absolutely, Kim. And so we started that book last week. So that's what we're on for book group. So that'll be Wednesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern time, as always. Thank you, Sandy. And then Friday night will be the second to the last Willows Bend After Dark. And I have an idea what I'm going to do for my makeup. I found something today that gave me an idea to expand upon. So I think I don't have to worry about that at the last minute again. So that's a good thing. Brownies. Not that kind. Yeah, I hope you can make it, Mary. And, if you can't, again, if it's whenever you can, because it's one of those books that can be jumped in on whenever, because each being is set up as its own entry in the book, and it's not like a ongoing narrative in a book style. It's like, like the A to Z's of the different little being stories, legends, etc., from around the world is essentially what it is. So it tells you like what they're called, what they like and don't like, where they're found, etc. So it's kind of written in that style, but it's each individual thing. So it's okay if you didn't catch the beginning of it. So next week we've got the different triangles of the world, and we'll see where that one takes us, because I don't even know. I mean, I know some of them, but not all of them. I mean, as evident by the Black Pyramid show that we did last week. I had no idea there was an Alaskan triangle. So kind of like short stories. Well, for example, yeah, encyclopedia is a good way to put it. Thank you. I can read one of the entries like we already had, just as an example. Okay. Let's see. It's a little harder. Let's see. So this was talking about elves and the different kinds of elves, which is also what a lot of places call fairies, as an example. And so, for example, here's one. It's not super long. Wind Folletta. All Folletti travel in wind twirls, or as they are known in Italy, knots of wind. It is usually the Folletto's fault when the wind turns destructive and unleashes rain and snow, wrecking crops and flooding houses. Many winds get their names the Folletti, who travel in them, and many Folletti are named after the winds they ride. However, certain Folletti occupy themselves solely with winds and weather. They are most numerous and dangerous in Sicily, which has one of the most violent climates in the Mediterranean. The Machina are wind Folletti who violate women. The Mazza Mariedu or Amazza Mariedu only travel when they have seen the blood of an assassinated man. They are responsible for earthquakes as well as the wind and snowstorms. Their special enemies are the saints Filippo and Giacomo, with whom they fight every year. If the wind begins to blow on the saint's feast day, the farmers know that Mazza Mariedu are winning and chew as much garlic as they can to drive the Folletti away. In Sardinia, wind twirls are caused by the Suma Scazzo, who predicts misfortune. In Friuli, the Grandinelli, or little hail can be driven away by the sound of church bells. The Morelli are known in Calabria, Lazio, and Abruzzo under various names. In Abruzzo, they take the form of little boys with castanets and silk hats who travel in whirlwinds and bang about in houses. The northern Italian Macedonian, the women kissers, rides in debris and steals kisses as he passes by. He is lord, his subjects are responsible for the dust twirls seen in the fields. Identification. The Willows are about the same size as the Nofoli, but almost always invisible. The Abruzzo Mazzarelli is about 2 feet high and wears a silk hat with flowers. He carries castanets. At times, he also takes the form of a grasshopper. The Winfiletti are known throughout Italy. So there's an example of one of the ones that like we already read last week. You're very welcome, Mary. So that's kind of like the gist of it. It goes through all the different forms. It's a book that my mom had gotten me. I think it was the year she died. Let me double check the inscription. Yes, it was she died in April of that year, or sorry, in September. This book is dated for April. So May, June, July, August, September. So 5 months before she crossed. It was a gift from her to me and also then to my daughter to pass on to her. But we know that's not going to happen. But at any rate, it was what I had on hand that everybody voted on. My fairy was about half the size of a Barbie doll. Cool. And I believe, I have to double check it, but I think that the video is saved in the group, maybe in the album section. I'll have to double check. But Tanya had sent me video that she had taken last year at her house that, she ran it by me to see what was my take on it. And it was the Fae. There was a few of them flying like around the trees and stuff on her property. I'm usually tied up till 7:30 or 7:45. Well, I hope you're able to undo those knots, Renee. And they just were like little lights basically, but there was no other explanation. They definitely weren't fireflies because it was like wasn't it early spring or something, Tanya? Where it was still quite chilly, no leaves were on the trees and grasses were brown and things that indicate colder weather. So it wasn't fireflies. Fireflies aren't active at that time of year, especially not in Missouri. Yeah, I will double check where the video is now. If it's not saved into this group, if it got sent away with the other original Willows Bend group, I still have a copy of it and can repost it for everybody, and I'll tag you guys in it if you're interested. But it was very interesting, and it was the only video I've ever seen in person that I found valid, because the only other closest one I really came across was when we did the show on the fairies. There was a gentleman who had taken pictures of what he thought were just a bunch of bugs, and he thought it was kind of weird how many there were. And then once he got the pictures back and developed, he ended up looking at them really closely, and you can make out little figures on them that had legs and wings and arms and had very visible heads, and discern them as little beings. And that was the only other one I found valid, and he didn't even believe in fairies, so for him to have captured him was really interesting. So what if it's kinky? Yeah, I will look at Marianne. It was in the group if I have it saved in this group, this version of the group, and hopefully it didn't get taken down with the first group. But I will look, and if I don't, I know I have it stored in my Amazon stuff, or Tanya has. I don't know if Tanya kept her copies of it, but I know I saw mine last month sometime when I was scrolling through things that it is still saved in my pictures. So it's in my tablet somewhere, but I will look and I will find it, and I will flag people in it in the group and let you guys know where it is so you guys can watch it. Whoever may have missed it, once you see it, you may be like, oh, I remember that. But if it doesn't sound familiar, yeah, I'll look first to save you the trouble, Tanya. And if I don't have it, I will, dig through mine. And if I can't find it, then I'll have you dig through yours. You're very welcome, of course. So there is another show for the Willows Bend. And so I will see those of you who are interested for book group on Wednesday night, and then Friday night for Willows Bend after dark. Much love to everybody. Thank you guys for coming. I love all of you. Have a wonderful rest of the night, and until Wednesday.